This is the Content Marketing Podcast, episode number 198, Give Your Content Heart with Employee Storytelling. Hello and welcome to the Content Marketing Podcast. This is the show where we help you grow your tribe and your bottom line through insanely good content. I'm your host, Rachel Parker of Resonance Content Marketing, and today is October 27th, 2016. Hello, or as we say in Texas, howdy, or with Halloween approaching, we might say boo, y'all. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. Just a reminder, this podcast is available on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and now also Google Play Music. So if you like what you hear, please feel free to click on over and subscribe so you can get every single episode delivered directly to your happy little ears. Also remember that my new book, The Content Marketing Coach, Everything You Need to Get in the Game and Win, is now available on Amazon in book and Kindle format. For more information and to see what folks like Joe Polizzi, Jay Baer, and Jeffrey Hazlett had to say about the book, and to download a free chapter of your very own, visit contentmarketingcoachbook.com. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to one of my Twitter friends. Don't know what this gentleman's name is, but his Twitter ID is M. Bohanes. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Anyway, we had a fun little exchange earlier this week. With Halloween approaching, I had posted a fun little slide share on content killing monsters. And these are, missteps that can just sabotage your content marketing program, and included things like the corporate speak zombie and the soul sucking vampire, just fun stuff. So I got a reply from Embo Haynes, and he said, how about the clickbaity swamp thing? Promises solid content, delivers hot air. Love that. And he also mentioned that he enjoyed the podcast. Well, M, if I may call you M, thank you again for the suggestion. I will definitely add the clickbaity swamp thing with proper attribution, of course, and we will definitely get him in the lineup. Fun stuff on Twitter. Okay, something else that's fun. We are barreling toward big episode number 200. I am in awe. I just can't believe that we are in a couple of weeks, I will put together 200 episodes. Absolutely astounding. I want to thank you so much, whether you are just discovering this podcast or whether you've been through with us from the beginning. I know many of you have, and just thank you. Okay, on to business. In last week's episode, we shared the best kept secret for amplifying your brand's content. If you happen to miss that episode, feel free to check it out on iTunes or Stitcher or via the RSS feed. This week, we're talking about giving your content heart with employee storytelling. But first, it's time to check in with our news feed for this week's rundown of news you can use. Big announcement from Facebook kicking off the news feed. They have got some new features that they are rolling out. The first is a new recommendations feature. So how this is going to work is if someone puts a request for a recommendation out there saying, can someone recommend a hair salon or a pediatrician or something like that, they can turn on a recommendations function that will show additional information like reviews, addresses, and can even pull up maps so that if you're the user, when your friends recommend things, it will bring up some rich media information about their recommendations. They are also going to be simplifying the events function to make it easier to search and get information on local events. And then the final upgrade or new feature that they've announced is that there are going to be some new call to action buttons. So users will be able to, right from your Facebook page, they will be able to do things like order food, request an appointment, get a quote, or purchase tickets to an event without ever leaving your Facebook page. So really exciting features coming up, especially if you're more in a consumer-oriented business. But even if you're B2B, put your event out there and let people it makes it easier for people to discover it, or you can use the get a quote call to action. So lots of exciting stuff coming for the Facebook pages. So whether you are B2C or B2B, be sure to check those new features out. Okay, Pinterest has unveiled a new feature called Pin Collective, which allows brands to connect with Pinterest's better content creators. or I should say best content creators. Well, I said better. That's equivalent, right? And the purpose of this is, and quoting from Pinterest here, to create content that simultaneously delights pinners and drives business results. Now, I didn't see any concrete examples in this post, but I could imagine, a company like Pampers teaming up with a ninja mom Pinterest pinner who pins some wonderful stuff for moms and babies and kids. I could see them teaming up with her and establishing a partnership. So advertisers who are interested in working with the Pin Collective should reach out either your Pinterest partner manager if you've got some advertising already going with them, or you can send an email to pin-collective@pinterest.com. pin-collective@pinterest.com. Okay, one more item in the news feed. LinkedIn is updating the skills and endorsement features. So now when someone views your profile on LinkedIn, they will see the most relevant endorsements for the skills you want to highlight. And again, quoting from the blog post here, endorsements are, quote, smarter by highlighting endorsements that matter most to the viewer, so you always look your best. And it also offers improved targeting that requests endorsements from your connections who might best know your skills and work. So it is rolling out this endorsements feature globally on the mobile app and will soon make it available on the newly redesigned desktop experience, which is kind of evolving as we speak. So it's a little confusing, but it sounds like you'll be able to like you might have completely filled out your skills section. I know for me, I've got content marketing, I've got blogging, I've got email writing. I may have press releases on there. So it will highlight the endorsements that highlight the skills you most want to put forward. So I might say, I want content marketing to be very prominent, more so than press releases. So it sounds like it's integrating some smart technology to let that happen. So keep an eye out for that new endorsements experience on LinkedIn. Okay, our content hit of the week is a nifty. Oh, we're back to a Whiteboard Friday. I love those, guys. Those are awesome. Whiteboard Fridays, if you're not familiar with them, they're put out by Moz, M-O-Z, which is one of the premier SEO authorities out there. And every Friday, they take their CEO, Rand Fishkin, and he does a whiteboard session on video, and they're like 8 to 10 minutes, but they're always awesome. So I want to highlight the most recent one, which is called Content Gating: When, Whether, and How to Put Your Content Behind an Email or Form Capture. So in this video, Rand covers a question that has baffled many a content marketer, and that is when it comes to that meaty, in-depth content. I'm not talking about your blog or stuff that you just put out there. I'm talking about things like your white papers, your ebooks, maybe your courses, really meaty content. Should we gate it behind an email form? So should we make people give us some information before we'll hand it over, or should we just put it out there? And just a few months ago, I was at a conference where David Meerman Scott was talking about this, and he was an advocate of just put it out there because it'll get shared, it'll get your name out there. Whereas if people need to give information, then they may or may not comply. I know I'm in that situation sometimes as a consumer. I'll hear about this great white paper and then I'll see a form. It's like, oh, do I really want these people contacting me to purchase their products and services? So it is an important question because on the other hand, as marketers, we need lead generation. We need to know, we need to get these people on our radar and on our list because they are more likely people who would be interested in our products and services. So Rand goes through all those pros and cons of both approaches, and he even makes some recommendations that can help us leverage the advantages of both. It's an excellent video, as the Whiteboard Fridays always are, and I will provide a link in the blog post for this episode. Okay, that's it for this week's update. If you stumble across something you think might be of interest to your fellow content marketers, please tweet it to me at @RachelParker so that we can share. Now it's time for this week's Spotlight segment. Give your content heart with employee storytelling. all this month, which, gosh, hard to believe the month is almost over, we have been talking about the internal aspects of your content marketing. And we're talking about that on two levels. There's the content that you create for your company's employees to get them more involved and more engaged and turn them into evangelists. And then there's the process of getting internal teams on board in contributing to your content, whether that's subject matter experts or folks from your C-suite, really getting them on board. And we've touched on the idea of creating a culture of content. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. But today we're going to focus on a practice that can strengthen both internal and external content marketing. And that is the practice of collecting and publishing employee stories. Now, employee stories are happening every day. And, you know, your employees, from an external perspective, they are the eyes and ears and hands and feet of your company. Your company would not exist without these folks. And so when we share those stories externally, we're putting a human face on your brand, and we're sharing stories that are compelling, that are interesting, but that also say, hey, here are some of the great people who are working for us. And then internally, you know, if we're sharing those employee stories, even if we only share them, the stories that we only share internally, that can be a real morale booster, and it can be a real gem when it comes to employee engagement. You know, seeing which employee is featured on their employee story of the week or the month. So it really serves us on multiple levels. We need to be aware of and start integrating those stories into our content marketing practices, because, like I said, employee stories are happening every day, and they're being told every day. You know, every department has its own almost like a folklore. You know, as societies develop, there are these legendary stories about that time so-and-so drove across town in a snowstorm to deliver something to a client who needed it at the last minute. Things like that. There are inspiring stories. There are funny stories. There are stories about going above and beyond for customers or partners, stories about serving the community. These stories are all around you. And the problem is we're so close to those stories that we don't see them as stories, right? But they could be out there serving your brand in a way that no other content can, in that it gives your brand flesh and blood, and yes, above all, heart. And remember, content is all about connecting with your audience, whether internal or external, and nothing connects like a personal story. And this, you know, employee storytelling can be especially beneficial for those of you who contacted me and said, Rachel, I am in a boring industry. How the heck can I rock some content? This is one example of ways to take that quote unquote boring, which I don't believe there is such thing as a boring industry, and to really to give it flesh and blood, give it a human face, liven it up, inject some energy into it, because everybody loves a personal story, no matter what, as long as it's a good story, well told. So what do we do? How do we get these stories into our processes? How do we make it not just a one-off thing here and there when the really big stories come out, but how do we integrate these into our content marketing process? Well, we need 4 elements in place. So I'm going to run down those real quick, and then we'll talk about them in depth. Number 1, we need awareness. Employees need to be aware that their stories are not just, quote, stuff that happened, right? They need to be aware that they have in their possession true content assets that could be out there building equity for your brand and growing engagement within your organization. The second thing we need is a curation mechanism. So how are those employee stories going to bubble up to the marketing team where you can turn them into compelling content? The third thing we need, of course, is a creation process. Once we know about the stories, we need to have a process for getting the information, writing the stories, and publishing them, and where and how to do that. And then the final thing we need to do, and this is something that a lot of brands miss, we need to close the loop. You know, if someone is featured in our content, how do we close the loop with them? Say, hey, here's your story. Isn't it awesome? So let's talk about each of these 4 elements in a little bit more detail. First of all, awareness. Employees need to be aware that they're not just going about their jobs every day. I mean, they are, but they need to be aware that there's something on a higher level going on, that they are creating stories. There are stories going on every single day, and they need to know that these stories can be playing a vital role in engaging your audience, whether internal or external. So when you're just starting out, there's the need to educate, and that's the need to educate every single employee in your organization. Educate them about why you're even talking about storytelling, and really show what good employee storytelling looks like. It may be an employee story that you shared successfully recently, or maybe that another company shared. One of the stories that I heard years ago, and it still sticks with me, is I attended a keynote by Zappos CEO Tony Hsieh, and he shared a story of when he and his gang, of course, they were and still are based in Las Vegas, but they were in New York for a conference or something. He and a few of his Zappos pals, and they had been out partying, and they got back to their hotel. It was about 2 a.m, and they said, "Wow, I really want some pizza." And somebody said, "Hey, Tony, I hear your customer service team is second to none, and they will do absolutely anything. Can we call Zappos customer service and get a recommendation for pizza?" Now, this was probably 5 or 6 years ago, before instant recommendations on your smartphone and everything. So sure enough, they called the Zappos customer service line, did not tell them that it was Tony Hsieh on the other end, and asked for a recommendation for good pizza in New York City at 2 a.m. And sure enough, the customer service employee complied and got them some pretty good pizza. I don't know if they knew it was good or they cared, but okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Somebody was ringing my doorbell. So where were we? Educating. So I shared that story about Tony Hsieh and the Zappos team, and that story has become legendary in the organization. So we need to educate about the power of stories, why they're important, and why they are worth the time and effort that we all need to pitch in to get those stories out there, get them created, get them published. And I find the best way to do that is an old-fashioned roadshow. So actually taking the marketing team and meeting with each department in groups as small as possible, and just lay it out to them, saying, this is what we're doing. This is why we need those stories. This is how they're going to help us this is how they're going to help us grow our external audience, how it's going to help us better engage our internal workforce. And you could even do a mock-up of a story that's already on your radar. So if you've heard about something that happened that someone did or someone was involved in, you can mock it up and say, hey, here's what that would look like. And generate some excitement. Really get people excited about sharing the stories about how they're going to help your organization. And then once you get rolling, make sure the internal teams know about the stories getting published. Make a big deal over it and feature it on your intranet, whatever you need to do. And we'll talk about that in Closing the Loop here in just a minute. Okay, the second element that needs to be there is your curation mechanism. So when a great story happens, how is it going to bubble up to marketing? How are your employees going to let you know about it? So every organization is different. So you really need to brainstorm with your team and maybe get some input from different departments on the best way to collect those stories. One option might be a page on your intranet. And that's great because you can actually provide a form that will guide them through the storytelling process. So, some people aren't really uncomfortable with a blank page saying, oh, tell us this story. They don't know where to start. They don't know how to phrase it. They don't know what details to include or not include. So with the form, you can actually guide them through, okay, what was the situation? What was the problem? How did you solve it? And then what was the outcome? So that's great for work stories. But one thing I wanted to mention in the previous section when we were talking about awareness is that it doesn't just have to be work stories that people are sharing. For example, as you know, Southwest Airlines is just a ninja when it comes to content marketing. And I was on their blog one time and I saw that apparently it was National Roller Coaster Day. There's a day for everything, and the day I happened to be looking happened to be National Roller Coaster Day. Well, they have an employee who works at one of their airports or in corporate. I don't remember where he worked, but he is a roller coaster freak. And his mission in life is to ride every roller coaster on the planet before he dies. So they actually had a story about this guy and about the scariest ride he's been on and how many countries he's visited just to ride the roller coaster. So it doesn't have to necessarily have to be directly related to your work. It doesn't have to be, well, this is how we helped a customer and this was the outcome and this is why we're great. It can just be something fun, like a guy who loves roller coasters. So anyway, back to your curation system. The best bet is your intranet because you can actually provide people a form. You can also have, and this is something we talked about last week in the tip, have a designated content liaison or content ambassador in every group and have that person just keep an eye out for great stories that start happening and have them take the responsibility for letting you know about the stories as they arise. So whatever method you choose, make sure it's, number one, easy for employees to use and to submit their information, and easy for your team to get those suggestions, to read them, to assess them, and then to get into the follow-up. Speaking of follow-up, element number 3 is, of course, your creation and publication process. So once you're aware of these stories, how is your team going to create and publish them? And as we do with so many things, we need to approach these stories like a journalist, as if you were writing a story for the New York Times or your local paper or your local magazine, and interview the employee. Sit down with them over coffee, maybe even, you might even get out of the office and go to Starbucks just to have a different atmosphere and to encourage a little more opening up. And then, of course, if the story involves a customer or a supplier or another outside party, see if you can interview them as well. But I like to make the interview process as personal as I can. So if we can be face-to-face, that's great. If we can Skype, that's kind of the next best thing. And then if all else fails, telephone or email. Email is kind of the last resort because it's, people are writing and they're editing themselves as they're writing, but so those are the 4 main options. And then as you create that content, think about it as if it's a story, like I said, for your local newspaper or for a local magazine. Make it personal, use quotes, talk about who the person is and not just focus on what they did or what the story is entailing. And then, be clear on why it's relevant to your audience. And then we need to think about the publication. Where are we going to publish these stories? Is it going to be internal? Is it going to be external? Is it going to be both? Will the stories go on your blog and social media? Is it going to be text only? Are you going to have a video element? So as with any other content asset, we need to think strategically about when, where, and how we're going to publish this content. So the final thing we need to do is close the loop. So if I'm an employee and I had a great story and I shared it, and we put together a story for publication, how am I going to know about it? And this stuff, it seems like a no-brainer, but I'm always surprised how many companies miss it. Marketing is just on to the next thing and they don't close that loop. But we need to close the loop and show those employees the finished product and have them really revel in the pride that comes from having their story out there. So that is my brief take on giving your content heart with employee stories. Of course, if you have any questions or want to add to the conversation, I would love to hear from you. And the best way to reach me is through the website resonancecontent.com, or you can always tweet me at @RachelParker. Now it's time for our content marketing tip of the week. For the past few weeks' tips, we've been talking about building a culture of content. And that is, making content so much a part of daily life at your organization that it's almost like no day is complete for any employee without touching content in some way. So one thing we need to do is give our internal teams a vested interest in content. And we touched on this earlier, we're talking about closing the loop, but it's not, as we say in Texas, a wham bam, thank you ma'am kind of thing. For example, if you're working with one of your top subject matter experts on an ebook, we need to keep them in the loop all the way through the content creation and publication cycle. And even beyond publication, share with them how many leads that ebook is bringing in, what kind of attention it's getting you, and how it's helping your organization grow your thought leadership and your influence in your industry. And then by helping keep them in the loop on the content, we give them a vested interest and a sense of ownership. They feel a part of this a part of this content element, whether it's an ebook, white paper, whatever it is. And that's going to benefit us on two levels. Number one, these folks are going to be more likely to amplify the reach of their content. They're going to have a sense of pride in saying, hey, I contributed to this ebook. I think you're really going to like it, sharing it with their personal networks. And they'll also be much more likely to collaborate with us on future content. So keep your content contributors in the loop. Give them a sense of ownership, a sense of belonging, and it's going to be a win-win-win all around. Okay, campers, that's it for me today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. If you like what you've heard, please feel free to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play Music or via our RSS feed. And if you really like what you've heard, please leave us a quick review on iTunes. Also remember that my new book, The Content Marketing Coach, Everything You Need to Get in the Game and Win, is now available in book and Kindle format. To learn more and to download a free chapter, visit contentmarketingcoachbook.com. As you know, I always like to leave you with a quote, and today's comes from one of my favorite ladies of all times. This was just superstar soprano Beverly Sills, and I loved her. Not only was she an incredible singer, but I saw her interviewed a few times, and just a really neat lady. I know she was artistic director of the New York City Opera for a few years, and just passed away a couple of years ago, but someone I really admire. Anyway, she once said, and I just had to look that up because I forgot to write it down. She once said, quote, "There are no shortcuts to any place worth going," unquote. Again, this is Rachel Parker with Resonance Content Marketing. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you again next week. Take care.